Good evening. Welcome to the 12th lecture of the Varahamihira Science Forum. This is a combined presentation by Tamil Virtual Academy, Tamil Heritage Trust and Varahamihira Science Forum. Tamil Virtual Academy is a branch of the department of the government, the IT department. They have started several years back to take the cultural and social wealth of Tamil Nadu and to educate the Tamils and provide an online forum for all the material about Tamil culture and Tamil history. And this organization has a website. They have monthly lectures. They have a whole bunch of programs. You can go to tamilvu.org, tamilvu.org to see their videos, their instructional videos on several subjects, including ancient literature like Sangam literature and later literature, grammar, Tolgapiyam and all that, and on other resources like temples and monuments, inscriptions and copper plates and culture and festivals and resources and interesting things all about Tamil Nadu. The Tamil Heritage Trust has been operating for about 10 years. We started with a series of monthly lectures on different aspects of heritage by various people of various expertises, professionals and amateurs alike, in several fields, history, archaeology, literature, music, dance, science, economics, law, and so on. And we've had about 10 years of programs, and last couple of years, one of our other programs, the annual program that we call Pechu Kacheri, happens in December. And the last 2 years it has happened in this particular hall. Last year we had a Pechu Kacheri about Kanchipuram in last December. We had a 2-day event of 8 or 9 talks. And the previous year we had a Pechu Kacheri on Mamallapuram, also here at Tamil Virtual Academy. And that was like 2 days of 8 or 9 talks. Some of these videos are, most of these videos are available on our website, tamilheritage.in, and some in YouTube and so on. Varahamihira Science Forum is a much more recent forum. We started it last year because while we talk about heritage, most of us think of the arts and the humanities as our heritage and don't necessarily pay much attention to, say, commerce or science. And those are important aspects of our heritage. One. The second, in terms of science, the fora available in Madras seem to be mostly professional fora. So you have medical conferences only for the doctors, you have engineering, something like IIT or Anna University organizes it, that's, targeted at the professionals. You occasionally have stellar speakers. A few months back, Ada Yonath, Israeli Nobel Prize winner, gave us a lecture. Eric Lander has given a lecture. Elsevier has organized it. Other people have come and spoken here, but they are targeted at very specific audiences, and not generally to the public. And there is not even really not many fora or well-known fora for the public, general public who's curious about science to interact. And so we kind of started this forum last year. Our primary activity has been a bunch of monthly lectures. We usually hold it on the 4th Saturday of every month. This Saturday, this hall is not available the next week, so we have advanced it to this week. This is not the first forum that does, public lectures for science. We've had spectacular international scholars come and speak here. You know that Madras has produced C.V. Raman and Chandrasekhar, 2 Nobel Prize winners. G.N. Ramachandran, about whom Badri spoke a few months back. He is, signal contribution to biology. Ramanujan, the great genius, mathematician, and so on. There are Janaki Ammal, of whom we recently had a Tamil Heritage talk. Significant contributions to science has come from the city. We have had lectures that are organized by the University of Madras, where such laureates as Niels Bohr and Murray Gell-Mann and such other people have spoken. First at the University of Madras and also at the Ekamra Nivas, the house of Alladi Krishnasamy Iyer in Mylapore. We've had something called the Bertrand Russell Society, which was organized in the 60s. Math Science has organized a series of lectures at Music Academy. That's happened very recently. And occasionally we had, different speakers at different fora. Most of them are unfortunately confined to certain institutions. For example, I think Bruce Berndt, the mathematician who's written a book about Ramanujan, gave a lecture at the Math Science. C.N.R. Rao, the Bharat Ratna scientist, and Rakesh Sharma, our astronaut, have spoken at IIT. We had some scholars like that speak at CLRI or Venkata Subbarao Hall or some of these other places. We had Ananda Chakraborty speak at the Chola Sheraton. These are not accessible to the general public. And almost all the lectures are also in English. We also would like to have some lectures in Tamil and so on. So this forum was started with that intent, to take lectures in science to the public, to give them a forum where we can interact. So we also started a WhatsApp group. There is a Varahamihira Science Forum WhatsApp group for the events. There is a All Things Science WhatsApp group to communicate. And we found that social media have been a very critical catalyst in discussing these subjects. Secondarily, we also have a Facebook page for this. Again, social media, which has been very effective. There is a Varahamihira Science Forum social media page, which is somewhat active, mostly with our events. We also started a kind of a summer camp earlier this year. We had Tamil Heritage Trust had handled a couple of summer camps, but earlier Varahamihira Science Forum also tried a couple of summer camps. One was we had a person called Siddharth Chandrasekhar who spoke about Newton and the Principia a few months back, did some science demonstration for young children, and I conducted a 5-day course on Indian astronomy and mathematics, that is astronomy before the emergence of the telescope, and what various people have contributed to it and so on. In fact, that will be the subject of, it will partially be the next month's talk will be delivered by me, and that will be about the astronomy of ancient cultures. I'll speak in Tamil. I'll say that again at the end of the lecture. So these are the kind of what we are trying to go through for Varahamihira Science Forum. Our lectures have been on various subjects, mainly on I spoke about Lavoisier to start it off with. I'll just give a quick recount of the lectures. The second lecture was by Badri Seshadri, who's here, probably familiar to most of you. He spoke about single helix, double helix, and triple helix, about the structure of the protein, of DNA, and of collagen. Then we had another friend, Sivaraman, who's a prolific writer in Tamil, speak about bacteriophages, which are somewhat unknown and I think kind of become eclipsed by antibiotics later on. We had Siddharth talk about Newton and the Principia and what led up to it and the discoveries. We had Alladi Krishnasamy Iyer. Alladi Krishnasamy, grandson of Alladi Krishnasamy Iyer, the constitutional lawyer, who this person is a mathematician. He talked about the science lectures at Ekambara Nivas and how that led to the formation of Math Science as an institute. We had a friend of ours, Akash Narayan, who's doing a PhD at the Fermi Labs in Illinois, and he gave a lecture on atomic physics for Alamelu Party. We called it that, so that try to make that accessible to the public. Then we had a lecture by Dr. Singananjan of the GSI, Geological Survey of India. He gave a beautiful lecture quoting from various Tamil literature about the wandering rivers and the cruising coastlines, how the coastlines have changed over time and how rivers have changed, how literature and geology have traced that through the years. We had Mr. Narasaya talk about his experiences as in the Navy, about the Pakistan War, about the mechanics and the other aspects of aircraft carrier. He was the first person to serve as a chief deck officer on the INS Vikrant, and so on. We had Shashwat, a friend of ours, talk about meteorology, about the Indian monsoon. We had Dr. Sisa Sundaram last month talk about Asthana Kolahalam, Tamil medieval work, 15th century, 16th century work on mathematics in Tamil, which is available incidentally in Tamil Virtual Academy's webpage. So very fairly set of interesting lectures, I would think. So to today's speaker, most of us actually in Tamil Heritage Trust and heritage enthusiasts know of Dr. Dayanandan through his other connection to heritage, which is his researches on Mamallapuram and Kanchipuram and Pallava heritage as part of the what's called the Tambaram Research Associates, a set of 4 professors at Madras Christian College, Michael Lockwood Gift Ceremony, Vishnu Bhatt, and Professor Dayanandan. And we are very quite familiar with their some of their works there. And so that's the other connection we have. But he is a botanist. Incidentally, all four of them have nothing to do with, they are not historians or art historians, statisticians, literary experts and so on. And he is a botanist. So who better to talk about evolution, which is something that's, that's of interest to all of us. Our mindset tends to stop, the general public, we tend not to read past, what's in our textbooks. Our idea of evolution is stuck with Charles Darwin, his discovery. We kind of think of the evolution of man from apes as, kind of the ultimate finale. Some of us may have heard of DNA, and that's pretty much it. But, the concept of evolution itself has evolved over time, and that's effectively what he's going to talk about. What has happened since Darwin? What is the grand heritage that Darwin left to us? What other things have happened? For example, Darwin didn't know much about genetics. Mendel wrote a letter to him, he never read it. The field of genetics came a little later. That was, merged with other scholars like J.B.S. Haldane, who revived that field. Then you had, after the discovery of the atomic structure and understanding of chemical structure and so on, we had understanding of molecular structure and researches, which is where DNA and protein and all these structures are understood. Then we had something like the discovery of things like mitochondria and their evolution, and later on even the discovery of archaea. And I hope he goes through all of that, but he's going to, he's going to surprise us, I think, and he's going to tell us what this thing means to us. Briefly, I'll read from his resume. We've been taught botany at Madras Christian College for 38 years. He is a Madras University first rank holder in BSc in 1964 and MSc in 1967. He earned his PhD at the University of Michigan on a Fulbright scholarship. He was also a NASA postdoctoral fellow, and he received the Sir C.V. Raman Gold Medal for research from Madras University and the Dr. Radhakrishnan Best Teacher Award from the government of Tamil Nadu. I think a spectacular record. He has many PhD and MPhil students. He has researched on rice, grasses, neem, stomatal movements, plant hormones, water transport, license. These are, and gravitational biology. I think that field might interest all of us. We may not be familiar with such a subject. Other interests are plant interaction, medicinal plants, ecology, butterflies, and so on. And of course, I mentioned the collaboration with Michael Lockwood, Gift Ceremony, etc. So I think I've taken up enough time for the introduction. Without further ado, I request Professor Dayanandan to entertain us with a talk on evolution, the grand heritage. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, you should continue and finish my lecture. We're going to set up the computer on top. Meantime, I brought a lot of slides to show, and I will show. But I also brought a few things. These are accessories. And I would like to show them now so that you can come back after the lecture and see them also. And some friends have said, at least, I'm going to go up there.
It's also going on live streaming. So if you could just... We have a hand mic.
Okay, sorry. சில தம்பிங்க தமிழில் பேச முடியுமான்னு வேற கேட்டாங்க. ஆனால் அட்லீஸ்ட் இது சம்மரியாவது தமிழில் சொல்கிறேன். ஒரு பூ கொண்டு வந்திருக்கேன், என் வீட்டில் வளருது. நீங்கள் அதுக்கப்புறம் பார்க்கலாம். அன்ஃபார்ச்சுனேட்லி 6 மணி ஆனால் அதுக்கு டைம் தெரியும், மூடிடும் 6:30 மணிக்கு. காலையில் 8 மணிக்கு வரும், அப்புறம் போயிடும். இந்த பூவை காமிக்கிறதுக்கு காரணம் என்னன்னு சொன்னால், இந்த பூவில் டார்வின் ஒர்க் பண்ணார். இது தென் அமெரிக்காவில் இருக்கிற பூ, உலகம் பூரா பிறகு இன்ட்ரடியூஸ் பண்ணாங்க. பேஷன் ஃப்ளவர்னு பேர் அதுக்கு. அதனுடைய டிசைன் எல்லாம் பார்த்தீங்கன்னா உங்களால் நம்பவே முடியாது. இப்படி கூட ஒரு பூ இருக்குமா, இப்படி கூட ஒரு வாசனை இருக்குமா அப்படின்னு சொல்லி. இந்த செடியினுடைய இலைக்கு கீழே டென்ட்ரில் இருக்கு. பாருங்க, இந்த டென்ட்ரில் வளையும். ஏதாவது ஒன்று பிடிக்குமான்னு பார்க்கும். ஏதாவது கிடைச்சா உடனே சுற்றிக்கிடும். அது ரைட்டில் சுற்றுமா, லெஃப்டில் சுற்றுமா, இப்படிலாம் வேறு படிச்சிருக்காங்க. அதையும் டார்வின் படித்தார். டார்வின் இன்னொரு புக் எழுதினார், த பவர் ஆஃப் மூவ்மெண்ட் இன் பிளான்ட்ஸ்னு சொல்லி ஒரு செப்பரேட் புக். அதில் அதை பற்றி சொல்கிறாரு. இந்த ஃப்ளவரை பற்றி எழுதும்போது அதனுடைய பாலினேஷனை பற்றி படிக்கிறாரு. சிலர் கேட்கலாம், இந்த மாதிரி ஒரு பூ யாரும் டிசைன் பண்ணாத தானாக வந்துருமா? டார்வின் நான் சொன்னார், ஆமாம் அப்படி தான் வரும். இதுக்கு பின்னால் ஒரு சூப்பர் பவர் யாரோ ஒருத்தர் இருக்க மாட்டாங்களா, ஒரு டிசைனர் இருக்க மாட்டாங்களா? தேவையில்லை. எப்படி வரும்? இந்த பூவுக்கு முன்னால் இதனுடைய ஏன்செஸ்டரில் கொஞ்சம் வெரைட்டிஸ் இருந்திருக்கும், அதில் ஒரு வெரைட்டி இப்படி வந்திருக்கும். ஏன் வெரைட்டி வந்துச்சு எனக்கு தெரியாது, அப்போ ஜெனட்டிக்ஸ் தெரியாது. ஆனால் வேரியேஷன் இருந்திருக்கும். அதில் ஒரு வேரியேஷன் மட்டும் அந்த இடத்துக்கு சூட்டபிளாக இருந்தது, சர்வைவ் ஆகிருக்கும், வந்திருக்கும். அது என்ன பவரையா அதை மட்டும் செலக்ட் பண்ணியிருக்கோம்? அதான் செலெக்ஷன், நேச்சுரல் செலெக்ஷன். ஹோல் டார்வினுடைய தியரியே நேச்சுரல் செலெக்ஷன். டிசன்ட் வித் மாடிஃபிகேஷன். முன்ன இருந்ததில் இருந்து கொஞ்சம் மாடிஃபை ஆனது இப்படி வந்தது. இந்த மாதிரி ஒன்று வர்றதுக்குன்னு சொன்னால் எவ்வளோ நாள் வேணும்? குறைஞ்சது மில்லியன் இயர்ஸ், 2 மில்லியன் இயர்ஸ், 20 மில்லியன் இயர்ஸ், ப்ராபப்ளி பில்லியன் இயர்ஸ். இது ஸ்ரீபெரும்புத்தூர்லேருந்து கொண்டு வந்த ஒரு ஃபாசல். 200 மில்லியன் வருஷத்துக்கு முன்னால் இருந்த ஃபாசல். நிறைய இருக்குது ஸ்ரீபெரும்புத்தூரில், இப்போ கூட போனீங்கன்னா. ஆனால் அழிஞ்சிக்கிட்டே வருது, ஏன்னா நிறைய பில்டிங் கட்டிக்கிட்டு இருக்காங்க. அங்கே போய் இந்த மாதிரி ஒரு கல்லை எடுத்து உடைச்சிங்கன்னா அது உள்ள அந்த படிமம் இருக்கு. ஏன்? ஒரு காலத்தில் ஸ்ரீபெரும்புத்தூர் பக்கம் வரைக்கும் கடல் இருந்துச்சு. அப்போ ஸ்ரீபெரும்புத்தூரே இங்கே இல்லை, அங்கே சவுத் அமெரிக்கா பக்கத்தில் ஓட்டிக்கிட்டு இருந்துச்சு, ஆஸ்திரேலியா பக்கத்தில் ஓட்டிக்கிட்டு இருந்துச்சு. அங்கே வளர்ந்த இந்த செடிங்க வந்து அப்படி மண்ணு மேலே விழுந்து, மேலே மண்ணு விழுந்து இப்படி கல்லாச்சு. இது சாண்ட்ஸ்டோன்னு சொல்கிறோம். அதில் மாட்டிக்கிச்சு உடைச்சி எடுத்தால் கிடைக்குது. இந்த செடி இப்போ இல்லை, எக்ஸ்டிங்ஷன். டார்வின் அப்போ எழுதினாரு, நிறைய நாள் இருந்தால் ரொம்ப நல்லது. The longer the period, the better for my theory, because it takes such a long time. இது இன்னொரு ஸ்பீஷீஸ். அதே மாதிரி இதுவும் அழிஞ்சு போச்சு. இப்போ இதுவும் ஸ்ரீபெரும்புத்தூர் பக்கம் கிடைக்கும். இது வந்து ஆற்றம்பாக்கம் பக்கம் போனீங்கன்னா, ஆற்றம்பாக்கம் வந்து பூண்டி பக்கத்தில் கல். ஏறக்குறைய 2 லட்சம் வருஷம் இருக்கலாம், அதுக்கு மேலேயும் இருக்கலாம், 1 மில்லியனும் இருக்கலாம், சரியாக சொல்ல முடியாது. கட்டாயம் 1 லட்சத்துக்கு மேலே இருக்கும். யாரோ ஒரு ஹியூமன் ஸ்பீஷீஸ் ஒரு முழு கூழாங்கல்ல எடுத்து இந்த மாதிரி செதுக்கி இருக்கிறாங்க. இது அவங்களுடைய டூல். அவங்க நம்ம ஊரில் இருந்திருக்கிறாங்க. தாம்பரத்தில் கிஃப்ட் ரோமணி எடுத்த கல் இது. பல்லாவரத்தில் அதுக்கு முன்னால் எடுத்திருக்கிறாங்க. முதல்ல எடுக்கப்பட்டதே பல்லாவரம் தான், ஹோல் இந்தியாவுக்கே இந்த மாதிரி ஒரு கல் இருக்குன்னு சொல்லி. ஸோ நமக்கு முன்னால் ஒரு ஸ்பீஷீஸ் இங்கே இருந்திருக்கிறாங்க. நம்மளாம் ஹோமோசாப்பியன்ஸ் நம்மளை சொல்லிக்கிறோம். இது ப்ராபப்ளி ஹோமோ எரெக்டஸ். இதுவும் டார்வினுடைய தியரியில் வருது. இது பற்றி தான் நான் முழுசாக பேச போகிறேன், படம் காமிக்க போகிறேன். நீங்கள் அப்புறம் மரத்தெல்லாம் பார்த்துக்கலாம். யார் வேணாலும் நீங்கள் இந்த படத்தெல்லாம் யூஸ் பண்ணிக்கலாம் தாராளமாக. நிறைய படங்க நான் வெளியிருந்து வெப்பில் இருந்து எடுத்தது, ஒன்லி ஃபார் எஜுகேஷனல் பர்பஸஸ், அண்ட் ஐ திங்க் வி ஆர் ஃப்ரீ டு யூஸ் ஃபார் தட். ஆன் பண்ணிட்டோமா? ஃப்ரீஸ் எடுத்துருங்க. கேன் ஐ? இட்ஸ் நாட் மூவிங். It's moved here, but it's not showing there.
It has changed here.
Sorry.
இங்கே ஸ்க்ரீனில் அது எதுவுமே இல்லை. ஓகே, ஐ திங்க் இங்கே ரிமோட்டில் தான் இந்த
சரி,
இந்த ரிமோட்டில்
அவங்களே பண்ணட்டும்.
ப்ரொஜெக்டரோட ரிமோட்டில், ப்ரொஜெக்டர் ரிமோட்டில் ஃப்ரீஸ் பண்ணிருக்கு. இங்கே ஸ்க்ரீனில் மாறுது.
ஓகே. ஹெரிட்டேஜ்னா அதுக்கு எவ்வளோ ஒரு காலத்துக்கு முன்னால் நம்ம ஹெரிட்டேஜ் சொல்கிறோம். ஹவ் ஓல்ட் இஸ் ஹெரிட்டேஜ்? மேலே இருக்கிற பூ கெப்பாரிஸ், பல்லவர்கள் மாலையாக போட்டுக்கொண்ட பூ அது. நம்ம ஊரில் இருக்கிறதுக்கு ஆதொண்டைன்னு சொல்லுவாங்க, தொண்டைப்பூன்னு சொல்லுவாங்க. 1978 எங்கள் ஸ்டூடெண்ட்ஸ்லாம் அதை படிக்கும்பொழுது அந்த பூவை பறித்து ஒரு மாலை செஞ்சு ஒரு பெண்ணுக்கு போட்டோம். அது ரொம்ப நேரம் நிற்காது, கொஞ்ச நேரம் தான் அது பூவாக இருக்கும். பல்லவ கிங்ஸ் என்ன பண்ணியிருப்பார், ஒரு வேளை அது கோல்டு இல்லை இதெல்லாம் செஞ்சு போட்டுக்கிட்டு இருந்திருப்பார். இதுதான் பல்லவருடைய மாலை. கீழே பார்த்தீங்கன்னா காந்தல், அந்த பக்கம் பார்த்தீங்கன்னா மாமல்லபுரம், அதுவும் ஒரு ஹெரிட்டேஜ் தான். இங்கே லெஃப்டில் பார்த்தீங்கன்னா ஒரு மரம் இப்போ பூத்து கிடக்குது. செய்யாறுலேருந்து ஆரணிக்கு போகிற வழியில் போனீங்கன்னா ஒரு 40 மரம் பூத்துக்கிட்டு இருக்கு. எங்களுக்கு அதுவும் ஒரு ஹெரிட்டேஜ் தான். எங்கேருந்து வந்துச்சுன்னு தெரியாது, இப்போ படிச்சுக்கிட்டு இருக்கிறோம். அதை இன்னும் கொஞ்ச நாளில் அதை பற்றி எழுதுவோம். எவல்யூஷன், the story of our grand heritage, because it goes beyond any time that we are using to study our heritage. American Indians, அவங்களுக்கு பேர் வக்கோண்டா. வக்கோண்டா இஸ் த பிக் ஸ்பிரிட். அந்த ஸ்பிரிட்டுக்குள்ள தான் எல்லா ஸ்பிரிட்டும் இருந்துச்சான், including human beings, animals, plants, and everything that you can think. And that spirit was looking for a place to settle down. And eventually somehow water came, land came, and Wakanda came and settled down. That's how the earth became live with plants, animals, and people. That's a myth, a good myth. All of us must have a good myth, otherwise we don't understand the world. And that's part of our heritage. Cosmogenes is the word that's usually used under peripheral, all the mythologies. Every country has its mythology, and Gopu would be interested. For some reason, we don't have such good mythologies in Sangam literature. Tamil literature is unique in not having a good heritage story. Anyway, such stories talk about cosmic mating, birth, egg. It's very primal, ex nihilo, it's out of the chaos, out of the underworld, out of evil, death and blood, through the thought process of a god, snakes, water, clouds, mountains, cyclical. These are all the stories that go into mythology. But this mythology can be traced back only for about 5,000 years to major civilizations. Maybe you can add a few more, but I've shown here the Harappan civilization and the Mesopotamian, which is supposed to be slightly earlier. But wherever you go, 5,000, 6,000 years ago, people started imagining and building up stories about their past and where they came from. And that's all our heritage is. Whether you talked about modern science, you talk about our Indian mythology, our Greek mythology, these are all. But that's restrictive for a biologist. Because if you talk about me or any other living thing and these plants, our history stretches far, far back, and that's one reason why we are interested in evolution. And the man who gave this heritage that takes us back to 3 billion years or 4 billion years, and the other people who added to this from the physical science world that takes life beyond a period when there was no life into 13 billion years or 13.5 billion years are the scientists who gave us a worldview. Newton may have been a person who was very religious, and he was. But then without his understanding ideas about mathematics and light and the nature of the light, we won't be able to comprehend the world or see the color that you saw just now. That's why we celebrate February 12th as the Darwin Day, International Darwin Day. The aim of this celebration is to reflect and act on the principles of intellectual bravery and not get confused with all kinds of mythological base. To have a perpetual curiosity to understand the world as Darwin had all through his life, and explore and use scientific thinking, hunger for truth as embodied in Charles Darwin, a day of celebration, activism, and international cooperation for the advancement of science education, and human welfare. All of this was dear to Darwin. In 2009, we had the 150th year since his publication. Since then, every year, all over the world, people are celebrating the Darwin Day. February happens to be very important for us Indians, because 28th of February is the National Science Day. That's the day Sir C.V. Raman discovered light scattering. Raman not just stopped with light and physics. Like Darwin, he had other interests. One of the things that he studied was flower color, especially those that had violet and purple colors. He was interested in using his spectrophotometer to study what kind of a scattering effect takes place on this kind of a color, and he published articles. And one of his little studies came up in a newspaper those days. And I was a young lecturer. And when you are young, you don't hesitate to write to big people. So I wrote to him, and he sent me back a letter, one of my precious possession. This he sent me in 1969, and he gave me a reference to where I can get further information on his studies on the spectrum of the flowers. I often show this, I don't want to be critical, but in 2011 I gave a lecture in the ISRO Science Forum on space biology and why India should take up space biology. And I sent my letter to about 20 different organizations and 20 different scientists, not a single reply. This is the world that we live in today. Nobody saw a monkey turn into a human. This is what we heard last year. 51A of our Constitution, fundamental duty, says it shall be the duty of every citizen of India to develop the scientific temper, humanism, and the spirit of inquiry and reform. Of course, people criticized Darwin also and said, now how do you say monkeys and apes evolved into humans? The single most important subject in biology is evolution. Probably in all sciences, because that gives us a platform to see the world past and present, and for some people to see the future also. Dobzhansky, a Russian geneticist and evolutionary biologist, said, nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. That was in 1973, and it is true today. It's even more true today. You can be studying bacteriophages, or you can be studying human beings. You simply cannot escape evolution because that's the basic principle that governs. I'm going to summarize all that I'm going to show in the next several slides, what this evolution is all about. Life has a history that can be measured in billions of years. So that's your heritage. All life, including the more than 30 million living species, we don't know the exact number, and about 600 million that had gone extinct. More species have gone extinct than they are living today. They are all truly organically related to each other. All life share about 500 genes, humans included. That flower that I showed you and that fossil that went extinct 250 million years ago is my relative. And that fossil had same genes that I have. Otherwise, that would not have lived. Otherwise, I wouldn't be living. The biodiversity of the earth, that is the variations we observe at the genetic, species, and higher taxonomic levels, and even ecosystem levels, they are all products of evolution. So you cannot understand environment, environmental protection, and ecosystem, and forest, and Western Ghats unless you also understand that this is a product of evolution. Even the more recently evolved species, human beings, with extraordinary mental skills, consciousness, and achievements too, are part of this history and heritage. We had our beginnings in a simple amoeba-like cell, and Darwin said so at the end of his book, and I will show his quote later on. The green color of plants and the color of many flowers are due to the presence of cell components that were once free-living bacteria. And I'm going to show you a slide, and this is amazing. I am not what I am. I am not a single person. Every one of my cells has bacteria that entered my ancestral cells long ago. That was not something that Darwin knew at that time, but that's what we know since then. It's now possible to trace our origins, ancestry, and roots of migration, and construct family trees by analyzing our DNA. There you are today, and life started there about 3.8 billion years ago, and the Earth was born just a little before that. And then the Big Bang, so-called, 13 billion years ago or so. So look how long the heritage of life is. Not 5,000 years, but 3.8 billion years. And to know that we are here only because this happened there is a true heritage. Darwin traveled on his voyage, starting from here, coming to Africa, going to Australia, going back South America and Galapagos Islands, and turning back to Plymouth. He was on a ship for 5 years. He had a few books that he could read with him. And one of the most important books that he had was Charles Lyell's book on geology. He was the greatest geologist at that time. And he was the one who said, it takes millions of years to form the Earth's crust. And Darwin was highly influenced by that, because when he put forward his theory of evolution, which required long periods of time, he was happy that Lyell had already said this. And Lyell was one of his strongest supporters at a later time when he came back. And this is the ship captain, friend of his. He was much junior. Until the end, the captain never believed what Darwin said about human evolution. You talk about plant and animal evolution, okay, I will agree. But human beings are very special. They couldn't have evolved through the process that you are talking about. Around this time, there was another great mind, Charles Wallace. He was studying organisms that are in the Indian Ocean, Indonesia, Malaysian archipelago, etc. And out of his theories came what we now call today as paleozoogeography, how the animals are distributed in the world. And Wallace knew about Darwin. Wallace sent his write-up on what he thinks evolution is all about. Darwin had come back in 1837, was writing his work. He had a tragedy in his house. Daughters had died. He was taking his time, and suddenly a letter comes from Charles Wallace. And he reads the memoir, almost 100% the same as what Darwin himself has proposed. Identical views on evolution. He didn't know what to do. He went to his friend Lyell. He went to his friend Thomas Huxley. And they said, go ahead, immediately publish so you can get your priority. And he said, no, I can't do that, because that would be trying to cheat my friend who had sent this letter. So they arranged for a meeting at one time so both can present their papers. Unfortunately, Darwin could not go because the day before the daughter died, I think. Charles Wallace, he presented his paper. Later on, Darwin put together and published his major work in 1859. But in all later publication, Wallace always recognized that it was Darwin who wrote before me, who thought before me, and said he had done it in that thorough fashion more than what I had done. So they remain friends. Of course, Wallace never agreed with human evolution. He still could not believe that human beings evolved through the same process that Darwin was talking about. He thought there must have been some special force when it came to human beings, very similar to what the Catholic Church believes now. The Catholic Church now believes evolution happened, but something special must have happened when it came to human beings, because if it did not happen, you can't have soul. And if you can't have soul, many other things collapse. Some of Darwin's book, it's not as though Charles Darwin wrote only Origin of Species. You can see from this, I won't go into all of them, but he wrote about many things. One of the taxonomy work that he did was on those little barnacles that get stuck on your boat. Nobody in the right mind would want to study how to distinguish the species between one barnacle and another barnacle. He studied about geology, how the coral reefs are formed. He studied about insects. He studied about pollination. He studied about power of movement in plants. And then, of course, in Galapagos Islands, he was studying about the beak of the finches. So he wrote many books. Unbelievable. I cannot even read all of his work during one's lifetime. But this is the origin of species. 1859. And he produced additional volumes in 61, 66, 69, 72. And every time he made minor revisions, and he acknowledged information that was not there in an earlier edition, he included. And in his preface, if you read, he talked about who are all his predecessors who thought and wrote things that are similar to evolution. His own grandfather, Erasmus Darwin, talked about evolution. The idea of evolution was there hanging around, but it was never put in the way that Darwin did. The day in 1859 the book was published, all copies were sold. So we are talking about a time 150 years ago where people were keenly interested and hungry for new information in England. This is the reason why that country and other countries were able to advance in modern science so well. And his books were sent to America, and they were also sold there. It's not as though everybody disliked the book. Most people liked the book. They were looking for information of this nature. Therefore, evolution is a master theory in biology. It's not a theory. Even today, we call it evolutionary theory or Darwinian theory of evolution, but the word theory is not applicable here. Evolution is a fact. You ask any scientist, they will tell you it's a fact. What's a theory? The theory is what is the mechanism that moved the fact of evolution. The fact of evolution is from simple organisms, organisms evolve. But how they evolve is the theory part of it. But even there is some consensus now. And to put it very simply, descent with modification. All living things, including humans, are descendants of common ancestors. Population can change over time and evolve into species. What's the mechanism? Natural selection. Darwin stuck to this till his death. Can human beings also evolve by natural selection? Yes. Can human behavior evolve by natural selection? Yes. Can qualities of human love and various things that we talk about can be part of natural selection? He said yes. Horizontal gene transfer is something I will mention later on that was not known during Darwin's time. Epigenetics is very new science that is coming up. I won't talk much about that. These are chromosomes. They were not known to Darwin well. This is human chromosome. Once the chromosomes were identified, then people were looking for what's the chemical in it. Once the chemical were identified, they were looking for what's the structure of the chemical in it. And that's how we now got the double helix, DNA. This is the paper, the whole paper in Nature. And that's what got Nobel Prize for Watson and Crick. One paper that explained how the double helix is there and how it duplicates. And later on, scientists were able to study all aspects of this. Now today's newspaper says in Mysore, you can rent an instrument, a DNA analyzer, pay for it, and you can take a tiny piece of DNA, you can amplify it. This is routinely going on now. Now everything is done at the micro level with microchips and computer associated. Then just before the DNA came in, there was Mendel, who discovered the principles of transferring of hereditary material. This was not known to Darwin. He was struggling. There is variation and there is selection acting on them, but how does the variation come? He didn't know. Actually, Mendel had already published it. It wasn't well communicated. Had they met each other together, then of course Darwin would have been happier to say a little more things about evolutionary process. But Mendel's laws, and then using these laws in statistical and mathematical analysis so that population genetics can come. Because Darwin didn't think of one species, suddenly one individual becoming another individual. It's a whole population. Out of this population, there is variation. To study how the genes are distributed in this population, you need statistical analysis. And that's what Hardy and Weinberg and many other people came to give. Now, here is a typical cell, human cell, plant cell, anything. Look at one cell here. This is the smallest biology I will give today. There's a nucleus. And here is a bacterium. That's another organism that's living outside. And this cell takes in the bacterium to eat it. Or the bacterium goes into the cell to kill it and eat it. We don't know which one is happening. But once it is inside, the cell keeps it happily. And the mitochondrion says, I will stay here as my home because I get enough food from the cell. And I will give you to the cell my capacity, which is I can generate energy for you. We call this as mitochondrion. I have billions of mitochondrion. Every one of my cells is now producing energy. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to speak because I have mitochondrion. And that mitochondrion was once upon a time a free-living bacterium. This is what we call as endosymbiosis. That was not known to Darwin. But endosymbiosis, once that happened in the very early period, about 3 billion years ago, organisms could start now diversifying and multiplying. Here is a cell with nucleus, its own nucleus, and it has taken in a bacterium which has become a mitochondrion. It's now trying to take in another bacterium. This bacterium is a chlorophyll-containing bacterium, so it can make its own food. Now the cell takes that in, now it can make its own food also. And that becomes a plant. So every plant has a bacterial mitochondria for producing energy. In addition, it has a bacterial chloroplast for producing food. So when you eat next time murungakkira, be happy that what you are eating is a bacterium which has just produced food for you there inside. And there was a bacterium inside the moringa leaf which has given energy for the cell to do this and the plant to grow this. And you and I or any organism is not one organism. We are a very complex organism. That's a heritage. That heritage goes back to 3 billion years. I mean, in fact, if you go back, this human sperm, some people think, also was a free-living bacterium which can swim around, which once entered the human cell. And without that swimming sperm, we probably wouldn't have done the reproduction that we are capable of. So now you have mitochondrion entering the cell, and this man cannot do all the big actings that you do as a macho without that energy producing stuff in there. And then a tulip flower or any flower plant cannot be beautiful without a bacterium which is entered as a plastic. I would often think, and Darwin would have agreed if he was there, and I will show you one quotation later on because he didn't know about this process, but he had a very special heart for plants. I would think this plant is far superior than any of us because it's capable of doing two things, energy generation as well as food generation. We cannot do the food generation. If you have a patch of chloroplast here and exposed to sun, make our food, then the world will be different. So what happened? In the early days, LUCA is the last universal common ancestor. That's what the scientists say. Biologists think that there was one final organism long, long ago which gave rise to everything that is living on Earth today, and that went extinct. And from that came this bacteria which are still living with us. And some of this bacteria entered this cell, and from out of that came various groups. Less than one human genome is because of this horizontal transfer of genes. We won't go into that again. Evolution gave us an Earth full of life, and that's part of the heritage of evolution. Biodiversity is a product of evolution. The love for all living creatures is the most noble attribute of man. This is what Darwin said. You look at any organism, they couldn't be here on this earth with us without the process of evolution. And you look at your body, 200 genera 1,000 species are living on our skin. You simply cannot get rid of them. You may think you just wash with a soap and you put the scent on your body. No. Even if you do, even if you got rid of 1 million bacteria, within the next half an hour they will be multiplying. And the bacteria that's in the back of your ear is very different from that that's growing on here, because your secretion here is different from the secretion there. Life is everywhere. They like to sit there and start evolving. A child is almost sterile only at the moment when it is born. A few minutes after that, organisms take over. You have all kinds of organisms growing in your tongue, in your cheek, in your stomach, and all over your surface of the body. You go to Mamallapuram, the Pallava kings knew this. And that's where the monkey is there. Another monkey is looking at the pain on the tale and Laos. And these are my cousins, and they were looking at that. And in 1978, I had a girl in my class, botany class, who was always scratching her head. I said, "What's the problem, sir? Thalayila pain pogave matangadu." So I said, "Give me some of your pain." And then this is a scanning electron microscope picture of the pain. This has evolved to be on your head, and that's the ecosystem. If you want to get rid of this ecosystem because you don't want Laos, then this will go extinct. And we are trying to ask this to go extinct, and most of them manage, especially my friends here who have bald heads. They made sure that at least one little living thing doesn't have a place there. And this one, if you look at it carefully, every little structure on its body has evolved to cling on to that, to suck the blood, to lay the egg, and the egg has got material cement to adhere to your hair. Oh, there is the bacterium. These are the bacteria on your tongue, seen by an electron microscope. So back again, a Big Bang, 15 or 14 or 13 billion years, nothing happened until the sun came, nothing happened until the earth came, and then life started about 3.8 billion years ago, and there you are back close to this place, and the red dot alone extended here 100 million years, and here we are humans. So from here we are looking back at life over all this period and all this period, and that's our heritage. This is the fossil I showed you. This fossil from Sriperumbudur, this fossil from Sriperumbudur here, they all were there in India when India was part of Antarctica, Australia, Africa, South America. If you go there, you will find the same fossil plant in these places. Earth has been moving. It's still moving. A little guy who broke open one of these fossils for me, and this plant, which you can see, cycas plant, which is growing today, is the closest relative of this plant. And this one, a different species that went extinct, that is still living. It's almost like a living fossil. There had been 5 major extinctions during the 3.8 billion years of life. Not one flood that destroyed everything. 95% of all the species that ever lived on the earth have gone extinct. And today we have this number of species living, and all the species are extinct. And this number of species living is estimated to be about 30 million or so. It can be more, it can be less, because scientists are still trying to determine. The rapid development, as far as we can judge, of all the higher plants with recent geological time is an abominable mystery. The origin of the flowering plant for Darwin was an abominable mystery. That mystery is still being solved, not completely solved. Botanists now have some idea of where the flowering plants might have originated about 200 million years ago, what it might have looked, and I won't show that all now. But this picture, which is a Tamil heritage picture, Kondrai Poo, this was photographed 2 years ago in Florida, near the Miami Botanical Garden. They have in the botanical garden of the Fairchild Tropical Botanic Garden practically every plant tropical that you can think of, every mango variety that you can think of. We have Thari Panai that are blooming now, and I had to write to the curator there, do you have Corypha thaliara
in your garden. And he writes back, we have 3 specimens of Corypha thaliara. Corypha thaliara was an Indian species extinct in the wild. There is supposed to be one growing now in Bangladesh, Dhaka garden. Otherwise, it is there growing in Florida National Garden. This is a picture, again, it's a beautiful picture that a friend gives me permission to use last universal common ancestor and everything that is living today. And you can go back in time when from a common ancestor the green algae might have grown and when the plants might have grown. You can go down to an earlier period when from a common ancestor animals went and then fungi went. Animals are more closely related to fungi than fungi are related to plants. We usually study in the botany department fungi thinking it's closely related. But the DNA studies now show that they are a distinct group. You can construct a tree like this, a complicated tree based on biochemistry, morphology, anatomy, DNA analysis to show which is related to whom, which is related to whom. But all these trees must go back to these trees. And the first tree like this was constructed by Darwin. Darwin constructed this tree in one of his notes, and he said, these are branches of things that are living today, and these are extinct. And he said, I'd rather call this not a tree, but a coral of living, of life. And then he constructed another tree, a very famous tree. And then this is the only picture that he used in his book, again showing how organism might have evolved. I probably have another picture and I'll show that to you. Here is the one. People are now using this to make necklaces. He said, the case must be that B and C are closely related than B related to A. This is the tree. You can't imagine that 160, 170 years ago, a man making a tree, which is today the very basis of explaining all kinds of phylogenetic relationship of every organism, including bacteria, fungi, and human beings. This is the only image that he used in his book, and he said, well, B, C, and D might have been living, but then they extinct. They died off. They did not give a future life. But here are A, and that branched out, and out of that probably some still are living. And he drew these horizontal lines, and he said, what would be the time scale between here and here? 10,000? He said, the longer it will be better. The more time you have given, it's easier to fit my theory of evolution. Because it also fits with Lyell's idea of geological formation, and that's what we know today. The fossil that I showed you is 200 million years old. Here is the leaf with the chloroplast and the mitochondria, which were once upon a time bacterium, using the light to make food. And here is the female of the Minminipoochie. And at night time, this is Madras Christian College campus, as some of these things still, fortunately. One night I took this and put it on a piece of paper. I can read from the light coming out of this gland the letters. What is this light? We call this bioluminescence. The bioluminescence light comes because of a chemical reaction that's going on there, but that light is actually sunlight. And that's why we celebrate Pongal. The light of the sun runs all living things on the earth. Here the common one, a butterfly and its pupa and larva. And this is your nerium plant. And this female plant knows exactly to lay only on the nerium plant and not any other plant. And Darwin would say that's what selection did. How this recognized that plant is part of the selection process. This plant is poisonous. There are some people who commit suicide by grinding the seed and eating it. But that poison becomes part of this pupa and caterpillar, so birds won't eat it. The male of this goes to a different plant and scratches the leaf and gets an alkaloid called pyrrolizidine alkaloid and uses this alkaloid to spray in the air as a sexual pheromone to attract the female. All these complex things that's going on can all still be explained by Darwin's theory. And if you look at the antenna of this butterfly, this is antenna from a Madras Christian College. I took it to the US one time. This is a segment of 30 different segments that make up a long antenna. And if you look closely at one of the antenna, in one of the dots, you see an organ like this. There are many such organs. Some recognize moisture, some recognize carbon dioxide, some recognize the chemical. And Darwin used to say, if you look at the complexity of this organism, what it can do, it's more than what human mind can do. There are some areas where we excel, but there are other areas where insect behavior is even more excellent. You have basmati rice, and that's a chemical called 2-acetylpyrroline, and that's what comes out when you cook basmati rice. And so you know your mother is cooking there, and sitting here, you know basmati rice is getting ready. What is this chemical? That chemical is in the urine of the male tiger. It's a sexual pheromone for the tiger. So the tiger goes and uses this in order to attract the mate. How come in evolution one chemical got used? Or are we as human beings, with our very, very ancient past memory that goes back to the tiger days, still using this and thinking that we are eating this as a food, but actually it's your sexual stimulant? You see this also in another plant. This plant is grows in some of the houses, and in Thailand people use this. This is not rice, but if you pluck this green leaf and put it in the ordinary rice and cook, your ordinary rice will turn back into basmati rice because the same chemical is there. Darwin had many pigeons. He liked to breed pigeons in his house. This is supposed to be the wild pigeon. And these are all the different kinds of pigeons that were around in England at that time. He said, if human beings can produce so many true breeding pigeons out of one pigeon, why can't nature select and produce all kinds of species? We do this in 200 years. Just give 200 million years for nature to do the selection process. So human selection was superimposed. The same way we selected chili. The chili plant is a South American plant. 300 to 400 years ago, there was no place in India where anybody was using chili for cooking or making a pickle, chili pickle. This was introduced by the Portuguese. But the moment it came, anywhere in the world, people started developing all kinds of varieties. They are all true breeding varieties. So the seed of this will only give you this. People can select plants or animals. This guy says, am I related to other life? These guys say we are truly related to other life. And in the book that Darwin wrote on origin of species, he had only this line: much light will be thrown on the origin of man and his history. He knew human beings also evolved in the same process that all other living things. But he didn't want to upset. He wanted people to read his book first. And he waited for a while. And then he wrote a book soon after his friend Thomas Huxley forced him to write. Thomas Huxley was strongest supporter of Darwin, and he wrote a book called Man's Place in Nature. He discussed the anatomy of human beings and compared with the anatomy of other animals also, and then said, Darwin, you simply cannot wait. You have to come up with your theory, because Darwin had already worked out his theory. And Darwin published his work based on the relationship between embryological things. Here is a human embryo and here is a fish embryo. Why would they all look similar? Why would you have gills as human beings, the gills that fish have? They are functional when they mature, but this disappears in the very early stages of babyhood. Why would there be brain structure which is similar in all these organisms? Looking at all these organisms, Darwin published finally The Descent of Man in 1871, that humans too evolved from common ancestors. It's a 2-volume book. Darwin's idea was that humans must have evolved from a common ancestral group, not directly from one monkey or one ape, but a group of organisms that were definitely prior and more primitive, and which one they could be. Among the higher apes that are living today on Earth, which includes orangutan, gorilla, and chimpanzee, orangutan is here. Chimpanzee and gorilla is here. And Darwin knew that the closest anatomical and behavioral other organism of all this is chimpanzee. So he said, if you want to look for human origins, you go back to Africa. Darwin himself, therefore, was telling, my progenitors came from Africa. And my progenitors came probably from a primate group. It is therefore probable that Africa was formerly inhabited by extinct apes, closely allied to the gorillas and chimpanzees. And as these two species are now man's nearest allies, it is somewhat more probable that our early progenitors lived in African continent than elsewhere. It takes a brilliant mind in 1870s to predict that he and his ancestors, living in England, white man, rich, powerful nation, is saying that he came from Africa and he came from ape-like creatures. Today we know that we are very closely related to chimpanzee, and there was some common ancestor. And we also know how these all other primates are linked and how long can we go back in time when the common ancestors might have been. In one of the lectures, I also said you are related to the chimpanzee as well as to the neem tree. And that's also true. We are related to the neem tree, except you have to go back way down to see in the phylogenetic tree. Darwin also wrote, among other books, The Expression of the Emotions in Man and Animals. This is not happy, this ape. And this is very happy after you gave food. He commissioned photographs of expressions of human beings. This appeared in this book. There are several plates in that book. And said all these expressions can also be traced back to the animal world. And nothing here in human expression is unique to human beings. Now we know that cousin chimp is our closest non-human relative. The only difference in DNA between chimpanzee and this, only 2%, 1.98% or so. I always tell my students, next time when you go to Vandalur Zoo, the first relative that you want to see is the chimpanzee before you see all other relatives. People have now identified genes, what is called the human accelerated gene, in all organisms, including chicken and chimpanzee and human beings. There has been rapid changes. It's the same sequence, but rapid changes that are taking place now as we are evolving. One of the professors, two of the professors, many of my botany professors are here, there. 92% of the mouse gene is similar to us. 90% to chimp, 18% to plants, and 500 genes shared with all living things. Some people, of course, were upset because they thought of human beings as a super creature, directly created in the image of God, endowed with qualities that are so noble compared to the animal world, and they could not possibly stomach that we evolved from ape-like ancestors. So they tried to caricature, but that was a small group and sometimes a religious group. By and large, there was acceptance. At the time of Darwin, there were not many human fossils. Just one or two. There was one Homo erectus skull that was known, not many. Darwin said, you must go to Africa, and the human evolution must have been very rapid, he said. And that's the reason why he thought there were not many fossil things available. But when they went to Africa, especially the Leakey family, they started finding enormous number of ancestral species, other than apes, more closely related to human beings. The computer technology now can put flesh on these skulls and try to create how our ancestors might have looked like. What happened was, from the ape-like quadruped 4 thing, we had a bipedal revolution. And that bipedal revolution occurred probably about 3.5 million years ago. When that occurred, we became taller and more intimidating to the predators which would be coming to otherwise eat when we were walking like this. Walking on 2 legs is more efficient in terms of calories used. We are able to use our front legs to use tools and hunt and gather more efficiently. We expose less of our bodies to direct sunlight, allowing for more efficient cooling. Otherwise, like dog, we'll have to be putting our tongues out. So standing up had its advantages, but it had its disadvantages. Here you are, and the heart is here supplying blood to your brain and blood to your back, but now you are standing up, the heart has to pump blood up, a difficult process because you are working against gravity now. Here you are, all your stomach organs sitting here, but now you are standing up, it is pressing down, so you have hernia problem. Here you are, blood goes up easily, but it has to take much effort to go up there. So many of the human problems and illness that we are still stuck with has to do with being bipedal, backbone problem, for example. But then evolution never said you will be perfect. Evolution is not perfect. It was not meant to be perfect. It simply evolves, and over a period things happen. This is one of the earliest of our ancestors, Australopithecus, 3.3 million years ago, that was able to stand erect. Not only did they find the skull and the bones of this, they also found footprints of this. Not only they found the footprints by Leakey and their group, they were such powerful anthropology scientists, they said this is a woman's footprint. With that, they can say how tall she would have been, what gait she would have had. Not only did they find that, they also found a child's footprint there. You can now build a story. Maybe the mother was holding the child while she was walking. Not only did they find this, they also found a guinea fowl, a chicken going there. So 3.5 million year old footprints have been preserved that people can now excavate and study. That's also fossil, just like a human fossil. Then you have Homo erectus, one of our close relatives, standing up. And there is a footprint of this, not unlike ours. The moment we had bipedalism and our hands were free, we were able to make tools. And it's the ability to make tools and design tools that made rapid development to your brain and neuronal connection. Because what's involved in making a tool? You look at a tool which looks like a spherical structure. You have to imagine, oh, I'm going to take this, I'm going to chip this. So you need something else to chip that. So you already know what you are going to create. And what you are going to create is what you will be using for hunting and gathering. This is the oldest that was known until a few years ago, 2.6 million year old stone tool. Now they found one that is even 3.3 million year old. So Australopithecus itself was using the tools. I won't go into all these details. Now we have a fairly good story. It gets minor corrections here and there as scientists find out more and more of the time period since 6 million years ago until the origin of Homo sapiens, where it occurred, what kind of tools that they used, where do we find. So what happened? The final story, therefore, would be that from Africa, some species moved out, the green one, to India. Other species moved out here in Europe. And finally, our species, Homo sapiens, moved out on top of that. So the stone axis that I showed you from Atrambakkam is what is green. Homo erectus came here and used the stone and disappeared. And then Homo sapiens came, and it's the Homo sapiens who are now ruling the world. This is the stone axis that was first found by Robert Bruce Foote, and an axe in Pallavaram, and a cleaver in Atrambakkam near Pundi. They are supposed to be 1.5 million years old. There is some doubt about the age, but one of our own Madras archaeologists, a lady, has been dating this now. Even if it is 1 million, here was a species other than Homo sapiens which was using these tools. I went there with a friend of mine. You can go there, you can see hundreds of this stone on the surface even today near Pundi. Human beings today who came out of Africa would have been somewhat similar in their character and color and stature. But after they came out, you begin to see the variation. This is all part of our heritage that goes back to maybe 60,000, 70,000 years ago. You are not what you think you are, we already said. But now there is another story to this. If you want to study your chromosome and the DNA in your chromosome, and you can use this to date your ancestry, you can also study the DNA in the mitochondrion. After all, the mitochondrion was a bacterium that came into you. It had its own DNA. If you are studying a plant, of course, you can study the plant DNA. The botanists do that. But by studying the DNA in the nucleus or in the mitochondria, now we are able to trace more history than we can. Why? This is a human egg, actual egg. And see how large that is compared to the sperms that are roaming around it. Part of the human egg and the sperm. Inside the human egg is 1/2 the chromosome number of a normal human being like me. The other half of the chromosome number is brought by the sperm, and they join together. Some of these sperms bring what we call as a Y chromosome. Some of them don't have the Y chromosome, they bring an X chromosome. Depending upon what chromosome they bring to the egg, and the fertilized egg produces either a woman or a male or a female child. Those sperms which carry Y chromosome, when they fertilize an egg, they produce a male child. So if you can study the Y chromosome DNA, you can trace your ancestry back all the way through the mutations that are found in the Y chromosome. If you study the DNA of the mitochondrion, which Amma has, you can study the ancestry of your mother. I have mitochondria in my body, but I did not get it from my father. My father's sperm was too small to carry a mitochondrion. I got my mitochondrion from my mother because her egg was fairly big. All of you have your mitochondrion that came from your mother. And all the men here got your Y chromosome that came to your father. And all the women here don't have a Y chromosome. You cannot trace your ancestry through the Y chromosome. Now the technology is so advanced that some of these people who have studied the mitochondria of the people all around the world say that there was a woman in Africa, probably 200,000 years ago. Some say maybe you have to push it back to 300,000 years ago. One woman where all our mitochondrial DNA go and coalesce. This possibly could be the woman from which all the human beings we are living on the earth might have evolved. They give the various names because this was discovered there. They gave the name African Eve. But some said, no, don't use the Eve because there's a Christian implication to that. So you call that as a mitochondrial Eve and things like that. 7 billion people now living. 140 billion people dead since we became human species. And all the 7 billion species can trace their ancestry back probably to that one woman, or maybe a few women, even if there are some changes in scientific advancement. 100,000 years ago, there were no people in India. You cannot talk of any heritage in India. You cannot talk of any heritage in South America or North America, any place else. The only place where there was some heritage was in Africa at that time. And then all human cognitive skills already developed in Africa before they moved out of Africa. The cognitive skills is what we call brain-based, the ability to think, read, learn, remember, reason, pay attention, and communicate. And Darwin already wrote in his book, intellectual ability by selection made the most dominant animal humans. And he said, selection made it possible for human people to observe and have memory, have curiosity and imagination, reason. These are exactly Darwin's words. 150 years ago, he was already writing where we got our ability. And that's why our heritage says, Yadu More, Yavaram Kalir. It's not just for people in India. It's for people in Africa. It's for people anywhere else. Whether the man who wrote this in Sangam period meant this or not, the implication is certainly there. All of us are also equally endowed. Color may be politics, but then we have now ability to trace how long can you go and find out this politics. This politics of color may be maximum 60,000 years. Because people left Africa only about 60,000 to 80,000 or maybe 90,000 years ago. Before they left, all human beings were dark in color in Africa. So every other color and variation that happened in the last 60, 70,000 years ago. We can put politics into that, we can put hierarchy into this and all that, but this is how we now look at history. 8,000 years ago, Europeans were dark-skinned. That's what their genes show. Not Indo-European speakers. 80,000 years ago, people living in England were not Indo-European speakers. That language moved at a later time, 4,500 years ago. That color change happened at a later time. Darwin's evolutionary theory was misused. Anybody can use any misused theory. Sometimes thinking rightly interpreted, something definitely knowing that they are interpreting it wrong in order for their selfish reasons. So that's how the idea called eugenics. Why can't we improve the human beings then? If genes control your character and there are some good genes, something that make you better, why can't we improve the human race? That's what gave rise to racism. That's what gave rise to Nazism. One of the interesting things was that people traced the DNA of Hitler. One of Hitler's descendant is in New York. And when this guy went to a hotel and ate food and used the napkin to wipe his mouth and left, they took the napkin away. And then they extracted the DNA from that. And when you study the DNA, this is a man, Y-DNA trace, it shows that he has Jewish ancestry in there. So here was a man killing the Jews, thinking they are an inferior race or somebody that they must subjugate. But in reality, he himself has a genetic basis with them. Charles Darwin was very clear. It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It is the one that is most adaptable to change in that particular environment. He was very clear about ideas that were evolving even during his period. How I should like to see the greatest curse on earth, slavery, abolished. His grandfather was abolitionist. They made plates, anti-slavery plates, and shipped it to the US. Darwin said 1 million horrid deaths is okay if that can abolish slavery. Greatest genetic diversity in the world is in Africa, because that's where people originated. It's a vast country. The next to Africa is India, because this is one of the major places where people came and settled as they were migrating out of Africa. They came out about 200,000 years ago. About 100,000 years ago they were there. 70,000 years ago they were in India. From here they moved down to Australia, and then they moved down here. And with all the time some modification changing, and about 35,000 years ago they are moving from here to the New World, Americas. Before them, the Neanderthal was here. Another species called Denisovan was here. I show them now because as our ancestor humans moved out, they interbred. This was not known until 10 years ago. The DNA of the species living, including me, I have about 0.1% Neanderthal gene with me, and I'm quite sure that all of you have, because our ancestors, they came out, interbred with them. In today's India, the diversity, we have so many major segments, as the People of India study showed, some 636 tribes, 1,000 Dalit groups, 1,000 OBCs, 339 Christian groups, 580 Muslim groups, 50,000 small endogamous groups marrying among themselves, trying to identify themselves as different from their others. So who is an Indian? And why do they classify people? Darwin thought this was for selfish reasons. During Darwin's time, race was a major concept. Some people went ahead and said, not only races exist in the world, the races should be considered as species, or different species of human beings. Linnaeus himself said that. And Darwin said, no, all these people cannot be classified into races and species. If you do that, either you do that out of ignorance or you are doing out of self-interest. This is what is in his book on, in his autobiography. If you look at this, there was a time when people classified African race, Mongolian race, and the Caucasoid race. You look at all the faces of the people as it was published in an anthropology book in Russia, and I asked my genetics student when I was teaching, tell me who is an Indian out of this. They all have to scratch their head and finally say, everybody looks like an Indian. You can find one Indian or another looking like this anywhere if you travel from the Himalayas and Tibet and other northeast to any other place. All groups in mainland India are admixed. This is not what I say. This is the modern genetic studies that there are wonderful geneticists now in CCMB in Hyderabad, in Birbal Sagni Institute, and in Calcutta, and in Bangalore, in many places. The technology is now highly exploited. And one of the studies, these papers you can look later on, they said in 2013, after a survey, they cannot think of any one individual Indian anywhere who is not a mixture of something. The question now is, when did this mixing happen? So if people moved out of Africa and came into India, and if this is my ancestral mother, I always like to think that my ancestral mother looked something like that, the Khoisan people who are there in Africa today. This is a friend of ours. When she came home, I told her, you look like my ancestral mother. She's an American. Mother is a Filipino. On the father's side, it's an African and American descent. And she's a mixture. And she said, what does that mean, African mother? I explained to her. She said, no, take a picture of me and send it to my family. They will be very happy to know. These are the first scheduled tribes. If you want to put a label on any people as tribes, I would rather say that for the whole world, your ancestral people living in the deserts there, the Khoisan people who speak the Click tongue, is my ancestral tribal people. Here is the same lady, complete mixture. I went to Philippines, a brother of mine in Philippines. I went to Brazil for the World Cup, and here is another brother of mine there. And here is a sister, Warawon, who speaks the Dravidian language, Kuru. And here is one who speaks the Australo-Asiatic language. What's the difference between me and her? All of us came out of Africa sometime. All of us got mixed at some time. This place, Buran Singh Munda, he was very proud to tell me, my name is Buran Singh Munda of Hebram. He wanted to make sure that I know where he is from, in Gundwera. What's the difference between me and him? I am called a Dravidian because I speak a Dravidian language. Should he be called a non-Dravidian Australo-Asiatic because he speaks the Munda language? There would be no difference if we has to, I've traced my DNA, but if I were to trace his DNA, I wouldn't be surprised that our ancestral mother was the same 50,000 years ago or so. Just because I speak one particular language, I'm given a racial or other character, I'm called Dravidian. That should not be a criterion. I only speak a language, that's all. Just like this man speaks a language that came from Asian areas. Like today, the technology of DNA is so advanced that you can bring back extinct animals to life. It's not theory anymore. All that you need is a small amount of DNA of that organism. You give money, you give permission, there will be scientists who can bring back. They are already, there was a Lazarus project. Lazarus is a character in the Bible that Jesus is supposed to have risen, and therefore they gave this name in Australia. There was this frog which was dead, completely extinct and only preserved, and out of the DNA they brought back a frog. Of course, it died very soon, within a few days or a couple of days. You can bring back. Here is Neanderthal, the species that lived before us. The Neanderthal bone is here. You can extract the DNA from the Neanderthal bone and compare it with my DNA, and people have compared. That's how I know that 1% of this DNA is in my DNA. If you can get the DNA out of the bone, the technology won't be so far away that you can recreate a Neanderthal. And suppose the Neanderthal should come in the future to your Heritage Foundation and stand here and give a lecture, I wonder what you would think of him, a different species altogether talking to us. Here is Denisovan, another species, and all that they found was the tiny bone, this one. They knew, if you are a good anthropologist and anatomist, you can recognize a human bone from other bone. From that Denisovan bone, they were able to extract the DNA and compare it with human DNA. And people are finding that living human species have crossbred with Denisovan. I've already showed you that you can track down your ancestral story. This guy in National Geographic studies. If you give him a little piece of DNA, either from a blood, or you just scrape your tongue and give the saliva, and he can take the DNA out of that. The analysis shows, I gave my DNA, that I have 1% Neanderthal gene in my body. These are all the different groups. I won't go into the technical details, but studying the Y chromosome, all the people, we can say India has got people with H group, R group, L group, and J group as the commonest group throughout in India. I belong to the H group. What it shows is, you can also study the mitochondria for my mother. 50,000 years ago, there was a woman who just crossed Africa into Arabia, when in her mitochondria, a mutation occurred. And her mutation is there in my mitochondria. It came through my mother. That mother who carried the mitochondrial mutation called M is found in about 60% of the Indians. 60% of the Indians are directly related to me through a 50,000-year-old mother. And where else are there? They're not only here in India, they are all over the world. Because it was from India that these people moved out to many other places before they even moved into Americas. There was a man 25,000 years ago who had a mutation called M52, and I have that. And other people who have this also all over India. There are people living in Pakistan and Tibet and Australia and every place else who have the same mutation. This is my father and my grandfather. Obviously, I have this H1M52 mutation because it came from my father, Y chromosome. And it must have come to him from his father, my grandfather, which goes back to the 25,000 years old great-great-grandfather. Where else do this H mutation occur in the Tamil population? This is my son, of course. Although his mother is here, who you put as an American and not an Indian, the Y chromosome for him came from me. So he carries the same Y chromosome, M52. Now people studied here, you can look up this scientific study, it's not my study. This H1 mutation occurs among all these tribal groups, among all these SC groups, all this BC group, and all these Brahmin groups. Not that every Brahmin group or BC group has only this. There are some other BC groups, some other SC groups which will have either the R type or the L type or the J type, but at least the H type. But you would, or somebody would rather prefer to put me in this group or this group or this group or this group, which is absolutely artificial, non-scientific, and Darwin would never agree. Out of Africa, when people came, they interbred. We are also mixed species. Not only we are mixed after we came and settled in India or any place else, but even before we were already mixed because of race. The current studies, I'm going to finish shortly, there is a huge genetic studies that's going on in India which is trying to understand how the diversity occurred in India. One of them is that from Africa when people came, a group went to Andamans. A group came to South India. and they call them as ancestral South Indian, from these related people. And then these people were moving out, and there was another group that from the Harappan area, they call them as ANI, ancestral North Indian, and more mixing was taking place, and it's the mixture of all this that gave rise to India's population. More recent study, I think in a week or two, a complete study is coming out. 92 scientists have studied the DNA of people living in the periphery of the Indus Valley civilization. From the bones that were buried, so 4,000, 5,000 year old, not from the exact Harappan site. The Harappan site, in Rakhigarhi, they have gotten the bone, they have extracted the DNA, but that's not going to be included in the study. But from the periphery, they have studied. Some of their publication has come as a pre-publication, so people can comment on it. From the pre-publication, they are now saying from Africa, when the group came, one went to Andamans, and the other was settled in South India, called ancient ancestral South Indians. The other groups were coming in ANI. Now we know the time. So this is the Indus Valley gene from the DNA that they've extracted. I don't think I should go into the detail, but it's the mixture. And in this mixture, they are saying that the Harappan genes do not show any Indo-Aryan speaker genes. That came much later. Are we still evolving? Certainly we are. 100 times faster in the 10,000 years. 7% of the genes evolved in the last 5,000 years. We can go on, but I will not go on. To take maybe lactose tolerance. A baby is born to drink milk and digest milk, and the baby has genes are active lactase. But then as the baby grows, you don't drink milk. You're not supposed to drink milk, and the gene disappears. But then what happens if you domesticate cow or cattle or camel and you start drinking milk all the time? Then the gene remains active. So most of us can digest the milk, but some of us still cannot make the gene active. Then that becomes lactose intolerance. You eat a little bit of food, starch, one gene is enough to digest it. But you start domesticating wheat and rice and barley and eat tons and tons of starch, you need more genes. So we have developed more amylase genes. Instead of one copy of amylase gene in chimp, we have 10 copies. These are all recent evolutions. And as humans evolve, these are all the branches of all organisms. We are there in the final. We are now in a stage of developing symbolic behavior. We are going through a cultural revolution. And we have a post-human future that you do not know what it's going to happen. And we are now responsible for the 6th mass extinction. Why is it that in this earth, all this has happened in the last 13 billion years? C. Hopkins Cafe, mighty good, managed by cousin Mona Lokloka. All that it means is carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, potassium, nitrogen, sulfur, calcium, iron, manganese. Just about 14, 15 of those minerals. These are all what makes you and I out of the 100 different chemicals that you can find. The life that evolved on this earth using this. So people now wonder, for all the 40 million people who are dead, and only about 7 billion people who are living today, what is the future of these human beings? What are they doing to the earth today? Will they live only on earth? If when a body is burnt, all that happens is your water is gone, your carbon dioxide is there, and the Murunga Maram fixes it. I have a photograph that I've taken near in the old Nungambakam railway station. You remember there used to be a crematory there. Right there, a body was being burnt and there was a Murunga Maram tree there. I can assure you that the carbon dioxide that was coming out of the dead body was fixed in 2 minutes or 3 minutes into starch by the Murunga Maram. And you can be eating the Murunga leaf in the lunchtime and you are simply cycling the carbon dioxide. This is how life operates on Earth. This man said, if there is life on Earth, what are the possibilities there can be life elsewhere, given the size of the universe and the possibility of a planet? So all this is going on now, And anyone out there, there is no bigger question than this for this gentleman who passed away recently, Stephens. So we now have a new science called astrobiology, which is life in universe. It talks about origin of life, evolution of life, where else is life, and what is the future of life. And people are looking for whether we can settle elsewhere, such as, it looks like I've already taken too much time, so I'm not going to go in, but there are very big questions that we cannot stop asking. And Darwin himself asked, what does it mean to be human? How should we relate to the other human beings? How do we relate to all other living things which we have, to which we have genetic connections? So these questions never disappear. We are now in a stage called Anthropocene. And people don't know exactly when to fix the Anthropocene in the geological time scale. Some say 1800s, some say 1950s after the atomic bomb. But we are in a stage now where we are defining how the Earth and its stratigraphy will look. Science can say, how did the universe evolve? Mythology, religion will give different answer. Science can say, how did life originate? We are still studying. We don't have the answer. Mythology can also tell you how life originated in different mythology. How long has life existed? Very clearly science will say. Mythology will also say, but why are there human beings on Earth? This is not a scientific question. What is the goal of history? We do not know. What is the meaning of life? We do not know. These are questions that we cannot stop asking, but questions that are not amenable for scientific world. So there are scientists, those of you who are interested can look up. Some philosophers and physicists got together at one time and evolved a concept called anthropic principle. There are different versions of this anthropic principle. I will simply say the universe was fine-tuned to support life. That is, when the universe itself was born, Big Bang, the various parameters of light or magnetism or gravitational field, they were so fine-tuned so that life can evolve someday. There's another version of it. Universe is compelled to have consciousness and sapient life. We don't know why. No universe can be real until it is observed. Everything looks real to us simply because we are observing. Perhaps there is no universe. Perhaps there is no life that we can trace back to that form unless the consciousness. John Herschel, in his letter in 1836 to Lyell, referred to the origin of species as that mystery of mysteries. And Darwin said he had little patience with his exaltation of human beings. It is absurd to talk of one animal being higher than another. Who, with the face of the earth covered with the most beautiful savannas and forests, dare to say that intellectuality is the only aim in the world? It has always pleased me to exalt plants in the scale of organized being. Darwin thought of plants as organized being. Darwin wrote to his friend in America, I cannot see as plainly as others do, and as I should wish to do, evidence of design and beneficence on all sides of us. I feel most deeply that the whole subject is too profound for the human intellect. The questions that we were asking, God, intelligent design, why we came, for Darwin he said, I can't answer this. That the whole subject is too profound for human intellect. A dog might as well speculate on the mind of Newton. My theology is simple muddle. I cannot look at the universe as a result of blind chance, yet I can see no evidence of beneficent design. Can the mind of man, which has, as I fully believe, been developed from a mind as low as that possessed by the lowest animal, be trusted when it draws such conclusion? There is lesson for us. Because some of us seem to think that we know the answer for everything. We have concluded and this is finished. And here is a man who knew the world and living things and biology more than any of us, and says, can you trust my own brain to answer these deep questions? Einstein put this differently. The most incomprehensible thing about the world is that it is comprehensible. You don't know why I'm able to comprehend this. Darwin concluded, there is grandeur in this view of life. Having been originally breathed by the Creator, he couldn't really say whether there is a creator or not. At the end of his life, he said, I'm an agnostic. I don't care. I can't answer this question. At any rate, into a few forms of life, or into one form, the original life, from so simple a beginning, endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, have been and are being evolved. And this he wrote in 1859. I've taken too long. Thank you very much.
We have the hall for about 5 more minutes, so I'll limit the question and answer session to just 2 questions today, if anybody has any questions. Yes. Yes, David.
Thank you. The question is, we talked about evolution, and we've reached a stage where we have different species, variations in the same species evolving. So is it really wrong for one of these groups to claim that they are slightly more evolved than the others? That is the question. And one other quick question is, see, we still don't understand what life is, because we believe you started from the bacteria affecting the cell, but going 2-3 steps back, where we thought amino acids and the soup, primordial soup that we have, and lightning and all that caused life to originate, the earliest life forms. But we have very sophisticated labs today, and it doesn't matter how many amino acids you pour in and how much of lightning you add, you still can't create life. So these two discrepancies.
Origin of life is still a major issue and actively researched. Even as early as 1960s, people knew that it's possible to get amino acids out of inorganic compound, Miller's experiment, Urey and Miller's experiment. We still don't know how exactly, but the consensus is that it didn't come from someplace else or from a supernatural creature or a God creating. It should be possible someday to create. People are doing in work. As to whether somebody is more superior and some other organism are not so superior, I'm not sure Darwin would agree. He did say that our intellect is more advanced compared to that of lower animals. He thought of living organisms as those that can think and those that cannot think. To him, plants are not thinking organisms. All the rest are thinking. And he said some of the insects, like honeybees, have more complex behavior than human beings can do. So when you compare these things, who is superior, who is inferior, we do not know. Yeah.
Sir, you were telling that the non-occurrence of human fossils in Africa is due to rapid development of the evolution at that time. How do you relate this rapidness to the non-availability of fossils? That's one thing. Another thing is the specimen you were showing from Athirambakkam. The tool is 1 lakh year old, but the stone is about 1100 million years old. You were showing that the kallu, varsham and all this thing.
Yeah.
The kallu is actually 110 crore years old. It's an aggregate quartzite, what you showed. When the tool is 1 lakh year old. Am I clear?
Well,
yeah. The kallu சொன்னீங்க கல்லு இல்ல அந்த ஆயுதம் தான் 1 லட்சம் வருஷத்துக்கு முன்னாடி அந்த கல்லு வந்துட்டு 110 கோடி வருஷத்துக்கு முன்னாடி வார்த்தைங்க பட் क्वेश्चन இஸ் இது எதுக்கு ஃபாசில் கிடைக்க மாட்டேங்குது ஹியூமன் ஃபாசில்ஸ் வந்துட்டு கிடைக்குன்னு சொன்னீங்க இல்லீங்களா ஆப்பிரிக்கால ரீசன் என்ன சொன்னீங்கன்னாக்கா ரேபிடா போச்சு எவல்யூஷன் சொல்லிட்டு இருந்தீங்க how do you relate this rapidness and the non availability of fossils there
Actually, the fossils are available in very large number. They were not available during Darwin's time because they were not looking in the correct place. People thought it might have been Thailand, it might have been China. But once they went to Africa, the problem now is preserving the amount of material that they are digging up. In the Rift Valley area, enormous amount of skulls are found now. A very large number is found actually. The rapidness has to deal with the fact that human species have evolved from some other species that were walking bipedal in a matter of 3.5 million years. That's a rapid time compared to the existence of whole life, which is a long period. You're quite right. Ammi koravi kall irukalla amma arakrangalla adu nethu dhaan oru vela kondu vandu namakku kuduthirpaanga, but the kall itself might have been 2 billion years old. This is something that human beings made out of a pre-existing stone.
Thank you all for coming. I'd like to thank Professor Dayanandan for such a marvelous lecture. Sir, please stay. I'd like sir, please stay. I'd like to invite Mr. Mohan Krishnamurthy to give him a token of our appreciation. From a chemistry teacher to a botany teacher, I think is most appropriate. He is trying to deny self-interest here. I think it's a wonderful lecture. I'll connect it to Mahendra Pallavan. He talked about, I have to, right? So, because he talked about, all his haploid gene and how it's there and across the castes. And one of the titles that Mahendra Pallavan used for himself, he gave himself like 80 titles, and one of them is Sankirna Jati, which means mixed caste. And interestingly, you would wonder why a king who is probably very proud of his Kshatriya origin and his descent from Dronacharya and and Ashwatthama and the ancient rishis would call himself Sankirna Jati. But Mahendra, the brilliant man with a twisted sense of humor, it is Sankirna Jati is actually a term used in music, and I think he was probably referring to that. If Professor Dayanandan has a different view, I invite him to give a separate lecture on that for Tamil Heritage Trust at a different point. And so I thank him for thank you all for showing up. Actually, I have to make an observation. Mr. Mohan pointed this out. Usually we have 50-55 people in the audience. Today we have had 83 just signed up, so we are quite delighted. We hope more show up. I'm happy also that we have not just a theoretical lecture but also a practical demonstration. Those of you who want to, please do see that Gundu Perumbadu 200 million old fossils are right there. It's unprotected, it's just lying open. It's 30 miles away near Sri Perumbudur. Please go and see them. Okay. Next, so we have completed successfully 1 year of lectures at Varahamiira Science Forum. We are very, very proud of that. And what better than grand heritage of all civilization, all life. Next month, one of the, except for Dr. Singananjan who just asked that question earlier, almost everybody has spoken in English. I think the paucity of, and Badri spoke a little bit at least in Tamil, but even there the technical terms of all have to be spoken in English, otherwise people don't understand. For example, if we say, give us your email address and we'll send you our video via this website, உங்கள் மின்னஞ்சலை கொடுத்தால் நாங்கள் விடியமங்களை இணையதளம் மூலம் அனுப்பினோம்னா அவங்க வந்து தமிழில் இப்படிலாம் சொல்லாதீங்க, எங்களுக்கு புரியுற மாதிரி சொல்லுங்கன்னு கேட்குறாங்க. ஸோ that's a difficulty. But since most of our speakers, even the person who gave a talk about a Tamil book last month, prefer to talk in English. So just to break the trend, next month I will be speaking. I nominated myself, very self-interested activity. I will be speaking about பண்டை நாகரிகங்களின் வானியலும் கணிதமும் அப்படிங்கிற டாபிக்ல astronomy of ancient cultures except India. இந்தியாவை தவிர மற்ற நாகரிகங்களை பற்றி இருக்கிற இது லெக்சர் பேச போகிறேன். இந்த ஹாலில் பேச போகிறோம். August 25th 4th Saturday சாயங்காலம் 4 மணிக்கு. இமெயில் அட்ரஸ் கொடுத்தவங்களுக்கு எல்லாரும் இமெயில் வந்துடும். உங்கள் ஃப்ரெண்ட்ஸையும் கூட்டிட்டு வாங்க. தேங்க்யூ வெரி வெரி மச்.